Hey, everybody, it is Trags, Mike Petraglia back with this week's episode of the JungleRoar podcast. My pleasure in week, I guess, call it 2 of training camp, maybe week 3, entering week 3 of Bengals 2023 training camp. My pleasure to welcome back one of the best on the beat, one of my very dear friends on the beat. That would be the one and only Richard Skinner. You know him best as Skinny, covering the Bengals for Local12.com here in Cincinnati. You can follow him on Twitter or x.com at Skinny. Go ahead.
Local12 Skinny. Pretty simple. I make it easy.
Local 12 Skinny. There you go. Skinny, I want to get right to it and ask you your thoughts. And it's the question I get asked most often. Joe Burrow, when does the deal get done and how serious is the injury?
Here's my answer to the first part. I mean, honestly, I thought, Mike, after Justin Herbert was done, it would be a matter of days. I think I said out loud in the media room after the Herbert signing, I said it'll be done by the weekend. And then obviously the injury occurred on Thursday. I don't think the two are related. I don't know what you think on that subject. I don't think the injury has caused any pause in this, but I do think the structuring of this deal is very, very difficult to figure out how you're going to prorate the signing bonus.
Correct.
The Bengals are not keen on guaranteed money, as we know, but I think they're going to have to capitulate here just to make the dollars work to give up some guaranteed money in some years. But I also they're very cap conscious of not bleeding themselves to the point where they can't do some things, and so they are at a stage where you want to get to some degree as an NFL team. You want to have players worthy of getting paid, but we've seen you can't pay them all, and you know they've chosen to pay their two linebackers a decent sum. You know they've extended Trey Hendrickson, I think, really just to kind of prorate his bonus and help the cap in a couple of years to come.
Right.
And that was more procedural, but he got some good money up front. But yeah, the Burrow deal, Mike, I'm a little surprised. The only thing and I've said this from Jump Street, I've always thought it would get done before camp. I thought it would get done before the season. But let's not forget, he does have the rookie 5th-year option picked up for next year. And so the clock isn't like ticking to the point of this could be a disaster. He's still under contract through the end of the 2024 season, and he's going to get paid $29 million guaranteed because they picked up that 5th-year option. So, you know, maybe this is a process that continues to go back and forth for longer than what we expected. But I wonder if the 5th-year option kind of at least puts a little bit more of an extension on that to where neither side feels like it has to get something done today, tomorrow, the next day. And as far as the injury goes, that's the $64 million question. You know, I think the good news, Mike, I think you would agree with this because we've seen him in the locker room. He seems in good spirits. We've seen him walking around without a limp. You know, it sounds like he's going through his normal workouts. He's in the meetings. He's in the building. The only thing he's not doing is participating in practice. Again, I'm only surmising here, Mike. I would guess based on the initial timetable that it would be that week between the end of the preseason, that blank week, and then you have the start of the regular season. So that would give him, if that's the case, that would give him two good weeks to get himself ready physically and mentally and all of those things to ramp it up for the opener. If it lingers into that first week of practice, or that first practice injury report on the Wednesday before the Browns game comes out and Joe Burrow's on it, then that would give me a little reason for pause, but I don't think that's the case. You know, we've all guessed what's the definition of several. You know, when
I say 3 or 4, that's where I go with that. And I've always maintained that. Go ahead.
All right, so here's mine. So if I go have some beers with some folks, which we did last night at the Reds game, if I have a couple, that's 2, right? A few to me is 3 or 4. If I have many, that's 5 to 6. Several to me is ad infinitum. So again, it's everybody's definition of several. But I think from what we've at least seen of him, Mike, you and I and the rest of the people who have been in the locker room, he seems to be in good enough spirits, and he certainly is not incapacitated. He's walking around. So that I think that's a good sign.
My read on this, Skinny, is that I don't think the two are related, the injury and the contract.
I agree.
However, I do think now that Burrow is dealing with the injury, I don't think Brian Aralt, his agent from CAA, same agent as Joey Bosa, and Joey Bosa is sitting out.
Yes.
I don't think there's a rush to get Burrow back on the field, certainly from Brian Arolt's point of view. And I think that's where the two might be connected. And I do think that the Bengals are aware of this. And I think that Arolt is perhaps using this a little bit to try and motivate the Bengals to do a little bit more work on number crunching and get the deal done. That's
so
my
I'll
take.
ask you. Yeah, that's an interesting take. Do you think if the injury hadn't occurred that a deal would be done by now?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
I do. And I think now that there is Burrow's not on the field, I think maybe the Bengals feel for whatever reason they may have more time to manipulate the numbers because he's not playing. However, I think you're right. I think this really all comes down to how do the Bengals make the guaranteed money work up front. I feel that it's from Jump Street. It's always been about how does Joe Burrow get the most guaranteed money up front? How does Brian Arolt get the most money in his hands and get a deal that is not dragged out like the Patrick Mahomes deal was never going to happen in Cincinnati.
Yeah, I do think, when you crunch numbers of what a signing bonus would be, I mean, you can't get to a number that's good enough to prorate to make it work. So there's going to have to be some guarantees in some of these years to make those numbers work. And like we talked about, the Bengals don't like that. This just maybe have to be a time they're going to do. I mean, Von Bell walked because Von Bell got guaranteed money in the second year of his contract in Carolina. The Bengals were never going to do that. And there's two different things for those who are, I mean, there's a signing bonus you get, and that is guaranteed. Literally, you sign on the dotted line, they give you a check, and you can take it to the bank or take it to the car dealer or take it to the craps table. You can do whatever you want with that check. But then the guarantees are then the salaries are usually, you get X number this year, X number that year, and it's usually longer into the contract. The base salary is bigger because at that point they can get out from underneath the base salary. They can just say, you're done. We don't owe you the base salary. That's the way the league works. But when there's guarantees tied in, the signing bonus money is one thing, but when you start guaranteeing a year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, if something catastrophic happens, you're on the hook for a big number that really allows you zero cap flexibility at that point. And so, again, Joe Burrow is going to get paid, but I do think the structuring this is really, really difficult.
And there's nobody I would trust more with manipulating the numbers and figuring it, doing all of the calculus, if you will, of this than Katie Blackburn. Great. I mean, she is one of the most respected in the NFL at doing this. I think the Bengals are very fortunate to have Katie Blackburn at the wheel of these negotiations simply for that reason. She's trying to do something that's going to put the Bengals in a competitive position going forward, not like other teams who might say, screw it, just give Burrow his money and the cap be damned and we'll worry about it down the road. That's not the way the Bengals have ever done business, and I give them credit for that.
Yeah, and Mike, and listen, trust me, in my talk show radio days back, certainly in the 90s, there was a mantra that this organization was cheap, and they were. That was true. It's no longer true. They've held very true to the salary cap. They're not going to play around with the salary cap. They're always going to give themselves some wiggle room. They're always going to give themselves some rollover room. And fans don't have to like that, but that doesn't mean they're cheap. And they're not being cheap with Joe Burrow. Trust me, they're not. No. They're trying to figure out how to structure this to keep whatever core of this football team, as much of the core of this football team together as possible. And that's really, really hard in today's NFL. And I know people can look and go, well, cap's going to keep going up and going up. Sure, it is. We don't know what that number is going to be. We can guess what it's going to be, and it's going to go up a nice chunk, and they're going to guess some of that. But they also don't want to get in a year. And I know this has happened. There have been teams that they get to the, week 15, 16, 17. They literally can't field a full roster because they're out of money. They got no money left.
Bengals will never be in that position.
Correct.
I can guarantee you that. Also, it's important to note that with Logan Wilson signing over the weekend, that's not by mistake. I believe that the Bengals are trying to say to their, in part, a byproduct of the Logan Wilson signing is the following. We are signing players.
Yes.
We got the Trey Hendrickson extension done through 2025. I doubt very much he'll be on the roster in 2025. That's another story for another podcast. However, they got the Trey Hendrickson story done. Trey Hendrickson extension done. They got the Logan Wilson extension done. They've already got an extension done, actually way back early in the offseason with Jermaine Pratt. They have gotten a lot of pieces done. The two remaining items are T. Higgins and Joe Burrow. Those were always going to take the longest period of time. And I think it's good PR for the Bengals to put out these guys like Logan Wilson, like Trey Hendrickson in camp to let fans know we are extending players. It's just that this Burrow deal is going to take time.
Yeah, the T. Higgins thing is probably more married to that than the Logan Wilson deal was ever going to be married to that, because while Logan got a nice piece of change for his position group, that is not a premium position. Players are not paid at a premium price, and you can laugh at that when he's getting basically an average of $10 million a year, and he's getting an average of 11 mil for the first 2 years. That's not chump change to anybody, but relatively speaking in the league. But wide receivers these days are asking for a big chunk of money, and quarterbacks, as we know in this league, get paid a big chunk of money. And you have your more elite wide receiver who's due an extension next season, possibly. So this is not easy. I will tell you, I know it always seems like just pay him. Well, you can't. There's a salary cap for a reason. And so I think that's where we're at. And I do wonder aloud, and I guess I'll do it with you because I've done it with others. I'm sure you have too. I do wonder if T gets done at all. I really wonder if it's.
I go back and forth, Skinny. I can see an argument for it getting done, because first of all, because the Bengals have always, and you know this better than I do, have always had an allegiance to their own.
Oh, absolutely.
Own players, the ones they trust, the ones they know their organization the best. And T. Higgins falls under that category. I thought his comments after practice on Monday were sincere, complimenting Logan Wilson, or maybe that was Sunday. I guess it was Sunday. Complimenting Logan Wilson on the deal. He was in touch with him. He congratulated him. It struck me a little odd. Cincinnati's got themselves a good linebacker for the next 4 years, as opposed to we've got a great. But I mean, whatever. That's a little bit conspiracy theorist of me to say that, but certainly I think T. Higgins is on board with what the Bengals are trying to do, and the fact that he's here in camp working. He's not holding out. He has not made one peep about his contract. He is not a diva receiver in that regard.
No.
Yes, he has David Mulugeta of Athletes First, and we know all about his reputation. Has never worked a deal with the Bengals. Will this be the first?
I remember asking him back in OTAs. I literally said, "Why are you here?" And he talked about, "I want to work on my craft," because he didn't have to be there in OTAs. And in the contract situation, I think everybody would have understood why he wasn't there in OTAs. And you're right. I mean, he sat out one practice in camp, and we kind of all went over our skis wondering, oh gosh, is this? It was right after Burrow I think it was the day after Burrow got hurt. It was like, oh gosh, he sees the tea leaves. I understand it. And then he was practicing Saturday. He's practiced ever since. So it was just apparently a rest day or whatever. Maybe it was a day where he thought about that and decided to sit it out. It's all possible. But after that, he's been nothing but a professional. And the one thing I will say is, and I'm with you, I go back and forth on this too, because the Bengals value wide receiver. It's a premium position to them.
Yes, they do.
Don't pay for a premium position. No offense to Jesse Bates or Von Bell, they don't consider safety a premium position. They're not going to pay premium money for that, even though Jesse Bates' agent is the same agent as T. Higgins. But then I go back and forth saying, okay, at some point the money's going to run out. You definitely want to pay Jamar Chase. Can you pay two guys top dollar at that position? And could you just simply say, we're not going to make this work. Your agent is tough to deal with. We went through this process with Jesse, and we're going to do the same thing we did with Jesse. We'll tag you. We'd love to have you for a 5th year. Hopefully you play on that tag in the 5th year, and then you can go get paid. And I do wonder if that's the case, that you know that this is coming to an end maybe in 2 years with T. Higgins, and you in the draft next year go after another wide receiver. And we've seen, certainly the Bengals have done it with a lot of guys. You can plug and play rookie wide receivers in this league nowadays. And I hate to do that, but that's kind of where we're at. And so I'm back and forth on both, because they do value that position, and they value that kid because he's been nothing but a pro. He's being nothing but a pro at the moment. But man, the dollars are tough to make work sometimes.
The stars of training camp 2023, I don't think there's been any doubt about it, are Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, right? No question.
So I did this last week, and I'll probably do this Thursday, because I kind of consider tomorrow's practice the end of another week of camp. We can all judge when camp week ends. Camp week
right.
but I did one last week. I did a column of kind of 3 risers and 3 fallers. And in one of the 3 risers, I put Jamar Chase and T. Higgins together. And that sounds so idiotic, right? Because how can they rise? They're already stars. But they've been even better than ever in this camp, making spectacular catches, dealing with some quarterbacks that don't throw the ball away. Joe Burrow throws the ball and making great plays.
That's being
there.
kind, Skinny.
I know it is.
You're a very kind human being.
There you go. Jamar ran a route yesterday in which a cornerback knocked the ball away, and stepped in front, knocked it away, and he didn't snap, but he said that pass was late because he got out of the break, and It was late. I mean, the pass should have been as he's coming out of the break.
That was with DJ Ivy on him.
DJ Ivy, correct. And DJ Ivy made a really nice play on it, but thankfully the ball was, for his sake, the ball was late. But yeah, I'm with you. Those 2 guys have been just out of this world.
Well, and the other telling comment to me from T on Sunday was the following. We don't care who's throwing the ball. We still got to go out there and make plays. And that is a great sign from 2 leaders in that locker room that, yeah, we know Burrow's hurt, but we still can go out and make plays. And I'll tell you what, I'm not saying they're going to the Super Bowl or going deep in the playoffs without Joe Burrow. I'm not going to say that here. However, they are capable of winning games simply because if you have a quarterback back there who can get them the ball in reasonably good spots, they'll go up and get the ball. They're going to win. That may be enough against some teams.
Yeah, they're going to win. It sounds silly. They're going to win the majority of 50-50 balls. They really are. They're going to win those majority of it. And
right.
They're going to help make their quarterback better. We've seen it in camp. T. Higgins slicing across the middle, passes behind him. He contorts his body to make the catch. I mean, that's a completion for the quarterback that for maybe a lot of receivers, it's an incompletion. So those guys are going to make you look better. And you're right. I'm with you. You're exactly. You're not going deep without Joe Burrow, but could you win a game or 2 without him? I don't think you'd like to try to find out, but I think you could. This defense is capable of holding teams under 20. Correct. You have your wide receivers make a couple of big plays for you. You win the turnover battle, and you can win a game 20-17. And it probably is not going to look as aesthetically pleasing as it can when Joe Burrow's playing quarterback, but you can win a game, and it's because you've got some stars on the outside that can go make plays.
What about the safeties? I asked Zach this on Sunday before practice. One of the hardest things to do, I think, from our perspective, is evaluate safety play. Agreed. Yes, you can see the corners. Corners are a different story because they're in a lot of one-on-one battles. You can see them fight with the receiver, fight for the ball, try and go after the ball. With safeties, they have different responsibilities on each play depending on what defense is called.
Yeah, the other part too, and as you know, we all take notes differently. I'll usually take notes into my recorder and go back and transcribe plays just so I know what happened.
And I try to yell over your shoulder.
Yes, you do. Yes, you just, you're on a lot of these. But I went back and looked at this actually yesterday. I was just perusing some notes. There's probably 5 or 6 times that I've gone on my notes. Nick Scott would have blown that receiver up in a game where they're throwing a route in between the linebackers and safeties. The safety comes rushing up. He's not going to step in front of the pass. We see it all the time, but he detonates the wide receiver right as the ball comes. Well, you're not doing that in practice. You're not allowed to do that in practice. Your coaches will hate you. Your teammates on the other side, well, you don't do that. You just know I was in position to make that play. And so you're right. That's what's so hard to evaluate of would he have separated the ball from that guy? Would he have made that pass an incompletion? You never know. Same thing in the run game. Would that safety have made the tackle in the box, or would he have gotten trucked and the running back would still be running? I mean, that's what's so hard to evaluate. That's why, preseason games for some of these guys is going to be important. And that, we're probably not going to see a lot of the starters, but I'd be willing to bet you we see a chunk of the Nick Scott, Dax Hill tandem. Maybe not a chunk, but we're going to see some of them to get so Louis Anarumo can get a better read. So those guys can get on the same page in real time, real speed situations.
Preseason is going to be vitally important for Tyson Anderson and Jordan Battle.
Yes.
I do think one of, if not both of them, can flash something, as we like to say, in preseason that will stick with Lou Anarumo and say, we've got something there. We've got athletic ability. We've got a great tackler in Jordan Battle. Maybe somebody who can make a play on a ball like a Jordan Battle. And that's what I think the Bengals really need to see starting on Friday against the Packers.
Agreed. Yeah, and I think you're right. And that's a good way to evaluate those guys. Much better than what you can do in training camp practices, even going full speed.
Yeah, no question about that. And I think defensively, we haven't talked a lot about DJ Reader and whether or not he could at some point be extended. Probably not.
Probably not.
Probably not enough money there to do it. But he's heart still, as long as he's 98 is in stripes, heart and soul of that defense.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's so hard to evaluate running plays. They don't tackle. Running backs finish runs. They maybe get stopped up in the hole, and then the whistle blows, and they run through it or whatever. And so it's hard. There's a lot of times when the first team defensive line's out there on running plays, there's not a lot of lanes to go through when you're trying to go guard to guard. It's not a knock on the guards who are in there. Yeah. It's because DJ Reader's clogging things up in the middle.
Look, you covered, obviously, Geno Atkins. I covered Vince Wilfork. DJ Reader is approaching that class of nose tackle.
Yeah, the difference for Geno obviously was he was just an elite pass rusher inside. I mean, he and Aaron Donald are two, and probably Vince Wilfork's in that group, two of the most elite interior pass rushers of this generation. You can go back to Alan Page if you want, and Joe Green if you want, for Hall of Fame elite guys. So I'm putting them in that category. That's the big difference. DJ's not a great natural pass rusher. I mean, it's why he comes out on third downs, but he is the guy that gets you to third downs, right? He is the guy that gets you to 3rd and 6 and 3rd and 7 and gets you.
I think more the Vince Wilfork analogy to me rings true, because Vince didn't get after the quarterback all that much either.
Yeah.
Belichick asked him to plug a gap. That's what DJ Reader does.
Yes.
To me, when I see DJ Reader, I see a lot of similarities with Vince Wilfork.
He really is, and it's kind of a shame because statistics don't back any of this up. They're never going to back
Correct.
any of this up. It's why he's never gotten a Pro Bowl nod. He's just not he's not an elite pass rusher, but he is the heart and soul of what that defensive line does and is. And you're right, the money's not going to probably be there for him, but he's been a key cog in what they've done over the last few seasons.
I know Anarumo loves the guy.
Absolutely.
I mean, he's so reliable. What
do coaches love? They love consistency and reliability above anything. You can talk about all the flash plays you want, and they're all sexy, and fans love them, and hell, we love them too, right? But you know what coaches love? Reliability and consistency. I'm going to know that guy on every play is going to do his job, and I don't have to worry about it.
We already touched on him, Skinny, and we're talking with Richard Skinner, Skinny. By the way, you have a podcast. Promote that.
Yeah, it's a Skinny podcast. Rick Broering of Musketeer Report and I do one in the middle of the week each week. And we kind of touch on all the topics locally, from baseball to college basketball, football, Bengals, whatever. And we have a little bit of fun at the end of the podcast where anybody can go to Twitter and ask me questions on any topic, and I try to give you an answer to it. And then in Bengals season, he and I do a recap. Few hours after the game that goes up is either Sunday night or early Monday morning. So we do that the one at least once a week, and then the other one we'll do during Bengals season.
And online, local12.com. Correct?
That's correct. Yes, sir.
All right, let's get back to it. We touched on this already. Logan Wilson, the deal. You talk about consistency. Lou Anarumo loves Logan Wilson, and he should. And I wrote this on Tuesday, I believe it was, or Monday, and that is, had the Bengals won Super Bowl 56, he would have been in the conversation for Super Bowl MVP.
Yeah, I had a ticket on T. Higgins for that, by the way. T might have been in line for that as well.
Yeah, it was certainly. It would have been.
But yes,
Burrow, T. But Logan Wilson, the job he did in that game, I thought was as good as any linebacker, covering receivers out of the backfield and making tackles in front of them downhill.
No question. And it's unfortunate that it got marred by that pass interference, the extremely questionable pass interference call against him. That
on Cooper Kupp. Yep.
Yeah, that he kind of even joked about a little bit on Sunday, because
he hasn't forgotten that, Skinny. People watching this podcast, listening to this podcast, need to understand that still sticks with him.
No question. Because he knows he made the right play. I mean, I guarantee you, if you sat in a room with him watching film of that play over and over and over again and said, what could or would you do differently? I'm not sure there's anything he could have or would have done differently.
Right.
I mean,
Lou has always said, Lou Anarumo has always said that.
Right.
There's nothing he could have done differently.
Yeah, and I didn't realize this stat, Trags, and it was from the 2021 postseason. He had 39 tackles in 4 games. Now, granted, that's 4 games. That was the most in a postseason since Ray Lewis in like 2012. That ain't line. Logan flashes at times, but again, the consistency thing for him is there. I think his 7 interceptions are the most by a linebacker. over the last 3 seasons. He's got great ball skills. And the fact that he and Jermaine Pratt in tandem are so good in tandem and keep getting better in tandem. I think you'll see Jermaine probably expand into maybe more of a third down role. And I know Lou tries to get Akeem Davis-Gaither on the field, and at the expense, unfortunately, of Pratt at times. But I've got a feeling that Pratt will probably get more third down opportunities this year. There's not a lot of teams that have 2-3 down linebackers. That's pretty rare in today's NFL.
Bill Belichick would love that, by the way.
Yes.
He loves himself some 3-down linebackers.
Yep.
But back on the Bengals, this is the Jungle Roar podcast, of course. Marcus Bailey, the fourth linebacker, you think?
Here, Joe Bacci. I go back and forth on it. That's one position group, and I know you've done it. We've all done our 53-man roster. I've been rock solid on the 5 linebackers. I just don't think there's any wavering from them. Marcus, again, and I don't think this is lip service. Lou Anarumo doesn't throw around compliments easily, right? He's always been very complimentary of Marcus when he's gotten opportunities, and I think, he and Joe Bacci are really good back end guys that we've seen when they've had to play in a pinch, they do pretty well. And I still think Akeem Davis-Gaither has just incredibly untapped potential because I still think he's kind of
so fast. I mean, he might be the fastest linebacker.
Yeah, right.
Definitely the fastest.
It's a really, for what is a non-premium position, if you will, and that's never fair. They all mean something, but I think you understand what I'm talking about. That's a really deep room for them to have, and I think that's a nice luxury, really. When especially because how physical that position is, it's hard to get linebackers through 17 regular season games intact. If you can, good for you. But you're going to have some of those other guys play some meaningful snaps at some point because of the physicality of that position, and they got guys on the back end of that can do it and do it well.
Explain to the audience why Darren Simmons, the special teams coordinator, has the most important say on cutdown day.
Well, special teams is just a huge part, as we know, and it's the third phase of football, and it is, but that's the guy that's going to say, hey, listen, I know at the back end of cornerback, you may not have a spot for him per se, but I've got a spot for him if we can make it work. Same as running back, same as all those things. That's where, like, a guy like Michael Thomas, I've always kept him on this team as a fifth safety behind Tyson Anderson and Jordan Battle and the 2 starters because of his special teams value. He's a personal protector on punts. He's got a great veteran presence. He's got great value on special teams. Stanley Morgan the same way. I mean, it comes down to, can Andre Yoshavash play special teams? Stanley Morgan can and plays it at a high level. Doesn't really do much as a receiver. Occasionally goes into block. So those decisions really are Darren Simmons making a big voice on those guys.
All right. Speaking of which, Brad Robbins, he had a good day on Monday. I think he needed it because, by his own admission, he had hit a bit of a wall. And, one thing I pointed out in my video podcast after Monday practice, he is not like having 3 quarterbacks in practice. The Bengals don't have 2 punters because of the Drew Chrisman injury situation to begin camp. And so, or the medical situation. So Brad Robbins has been taking all the reps, and he gets tired. But I think on Monday, we finally saw what he's capable of.
Yeah, I talked to Drew after practice yesterday. He actually said he did punt some on the rehab field before practice. So that's at least a nice sign that he's getting a chance to get into the competition. And it's funny what you said, and I talked to Jay Morrison about this too, about Brad taking a lot of those punts. I talked to Darren, I don't know, a little over a week ago about, Brad competing with himself. And I said, how are you managing his reps? And he said, listen, I've had a 1 punter situation around here for a long time with Kevin Huber. So I've been able to do that. And then to hear that he kind of hit the wall made me wonder, did Darren maybe overestimate him kicking as much as he did and maybe pushed him too much to kick as much as he did? Because there was a day in practice last week where the team was doing 11-on-11s on one field. Brad was punting with the long snapper, Cal Adamitis, and Darren on another field. And I kept watching, and Brad wasn't hitting punts very well. And I could see the frustration on Darren Simmons' face. But as you mentioned yesterday, he had 1 shank job he punted probably 15, 20. Other than that, he was hitting missiles and he was pinning the ball to the sidelines. The hang time was good. The distance was good. We know about his hang time. In fact, I asked Darren about, is there something you'd like to see him do better? He goes, honestly, we're trying to cut down on the hang time a little bit to get a little more distance. And I think maybe that's where Brad was struggling a little bit too, of trying to do some of those things. But boy, he had a really good day yesterday in practice in that special team session.
Okay, here's 3 guys I'm really looking forward to watching in the preseason. Certainly, we're going to see the starters on Wednesday in the joint practice with Green Bay. That's going to be probably one of the most critical practices for the regulars, most of the regulars, when they get on the field with the Green Bay regulars. But those guys will not play, most of them, on Friday and going forward in the preseason. But for the preseason, Chase Brown, Miles Murphy, and Jordan Battle. Those are three guys, and they're all rookies, of course. But I'm really, really intrigued by what Chase Brown could bring to the Bengals.
And to your evaluation process, right? You see Chase Brown, he looks explosive running, but is he? Would he have gotten tackled, 2 yards into his run? Would he have broken that tackle? Would he have avoided that tackle? How has he done? He's had a couple of moments in blitz pickup where he has struggled a little bit and it looked like he wasn't sure what he was supposed to be doing. But let's see when the gets live and all those things. But as a pure runner, he's looked great. Frank Pollock, the offensive line coach, run game coordinator, was really praised him.
Explosive. He used that word twice.
Yeah, twice. And I'm going to take his word for it because again, it's so hard for us to evaluate. Was that a proper run? Was it not? Etc. Miles Murphy. Again, you get to see some pass rush stuff, but would he have sacked the quarterback? Would he have disrupted it? Because you can't touch the quarterback, of course. And then to your point of the safeties, can Jordan Battle tackle? Can he make the right read? Is he going to be in the right place? I think all three of those positions, which are really hard to evaluate in training camp practices, are really important to evaluate in game conditions. And that's why I'm with you. I'm looking forward to those guys too.
You know who needs to have a really good preseason to make the team if he's got a shot? Chris Evans.
Yeah, and I think that I go back and forth on that one of how many backs do you keep, and I'm kind of with you in that regard, depending on Travion's health.
It's such a competitive situation.
Yeah,
Skinny, they're not obviously Chase Brown is valued.
2. Yes.
He was taken where he was taken for a reason. Fourth round. He is on the roster.
Yes.
Joe Mixon is on the roster. Travion Williams is on the roster. I mean, he's been back at camp. He's out of the boot. He'll be ready by the regular.
Yeah, I'm with you.
That's 3 right there.
Yeah, and that comes down to, do you keep a 4th? And if you don't, Chris Evans is the odd man out, and maybe he toggles between the practice squad and the regular squad. I'm going to guess they would like to bring him back on the practice squad if that's the case, and that would be a nice luxury to have a guy in your system on the practice squad like that. And I think it literally comes down to, do you keep 3 or do you keep 4?
And here is something to keep vitally in mind when you're watching these preseason games. If someone who has honestly no chance of making the roster flashes in preseason, the reason that's important is they'll get cut, but the Bengals coaches will take their notes and go, okay, if he gets through waivers, he's going to be on our practice squad.
Exactly.
That is important to the player. That is of vital importance. And that's why when people ask what significance do these preseason games have, well, they're vitally important to these coaches who, if somebody goes down and they need to dig into their practice squad in week 7, week 8 against Baltimore, Pittsburgh, whoever, you name it, San Francisco, they can pull somebody off the practice squad that they've already seen play in competition.
Trent Taylor in 2021, when Darius Phillips struggled as a punt returner, Trent Taylor's on the practice squad. Bring him up. He became the punt returner for the rest of the season and had the big 2-point conversion catch of all things in Kansas City. So there was a guy coming off of that added some real value to your football team that year.
So that is it for this week on the Jungle Roar podcast. Skinny, you working on anything as we move toward the preseason opener?
Yeah, just doing a story on kind of what to expect from that Packers practice tomorrow, and kind of the stories from Nick Scott talking about he was on the other side of the fight last year with the Rams. We hopefully don't get to that portion of it, and then probably Thursday, maybe 3 to 5 things to watch in the preseason game, kind of the stuff that we're talking about today, and obviously the report from the Packers practice. That'll be a almost like covering a game, if you will, for all of us.
Too bad there'll be no Aaron Rodgers when the Packers come calling.
I would have looked forward to that.
I would have too. Well, he is Richard Skinner. You know him better as Local12's Skinny on Twitter. Be sure to follow him there. Be sure to follow him on Local12.com and check out the Skinny podcast. Is that correct? I got it right?
That is correct. You got them all right, Michael. You're not losing your mind, baby.
Thank God, because I do doubt that sometimes. And you are around in the media workroom when I am doubting myself.
Yes,
so
indeed. Go listen to
I appreciate your support.
You bet. Thanks, Mike, as always.
All right, Skinny, you take care. That is it for this week's edition of the Jungle Roar podcast. Be sure to click on the link below if you are watching on the YouTube page at Jungle Roar Pod. Want to hear all of your comments, good, bad, and indifferent. Until next week, take care, everybody.